Hello and welcome to Straight Until Disney, a Disney deep dive and analysis podcast, where each week I, your host Jonathan, takes a deep dive into the history of each Disney film and the legacy that they left behind. I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at straightontildisneypod, and you can email me at straightontildisneypod@gmail.com. So hello and welcome to the first episode of February. We're already here at the second month of the year, which is a little crazy. Thankfully, January is over. And we can start looking ahead to what's coming up across the Disney parks over the year. So there's not a lot of mousekeeping today, so it's going to be a bit shorter. But we do have some interesting things and tidbits, especially that came out last night. And we also have some just fun little things to go over that came out during the week. I'm going to start this week's mousekeeping with the sad news that Dinosaur and Dinoland have closed. Dinoland is no more at Animal Kingdom and will make way for the Tropical Americas with the Encanto, Indiana Jones, and Coco, I think it is. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a third section that I think is going in there. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the wait times yesterday were skyrocketing for the land for dinosaurs. So it had an incredible send-off to a ride that has brought joy to a lot of fans over the years in Animal Kingdom. And as sad as I am to see it go, I understand that they want to really bring new life into Animal Kingdom. And I think that area is really going to expand people's interest in Animal Kingdom as a park. So as sad as I am to see it go, I can understand why it's gone, and ultimately it's a great ride, but I think times have changed and the parks are always evolving over time. So as sad as it is to see it go, we will see what new things come, and in time Dinosaur might come back. And I mean by just as much as there might be hints of what was originally there, and ultimately that. And hopefully Dinosaur will be added to Disney Magic Kingdoms so it can live on forever as other park rides have done so in the game that are no longer in the parks and around the world. So hopefully we can get Dinoland or even just Dinosaur into Kingdoms would really pay homage to such an incredible ride that fans adore and love. The next big thing that came out last night that I'm very, very excited for is the Devil Wears Prada 2 trailer that I squealed when I saw on Instagram that the trailer was dropping, which was yesterday now, because I was not expecting it. And I'll be honest, I had worries for it of living up to the first one because it's an incredible film. It's hilarious. And the second I watched the trailer, all the worries went away because it's so funny. The fact that Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci are all back, and it's the same director who directed the first one, the same writers who wrote on the first one, so it has the essence of that film that fans love and adore. And honestly, I cannot wait for May 1st when this film releases. Now, which is going to be awesome. And ultimately, I do think it's going to be an amazing film. And I can go on and on about The Devil Wears Prada, and I probably will in a bonus episode closer to the sequel coming out, because I think it's a really good film, and it still stands the test of time 20 years on now, as the first one did. And it really, I do think it brought fashion and media back into the forefront at a time when social media was rising. And I do find it really interesting of what the story is with The Devil Wears Prada 2, because we've got trailers, we've got teasers. I still have no idea what this story is about, and for a film and trailer to be able to excite me enough to want to go see it without actually saying a lot about the story really says a lot of how well this film is going to be crafted, that it's selling itself without even having to say what the story is really interesting, and I really find that fascinating. In park news, we're going to throw over to Disneyland in California, because there's some news over for the 25th anniversary of California Adventure. There's new merch coming, there's new Mickey and Minnie meet and greets. Humphreys the bear will be meeting for the first time, so there's that to look forward to. There's some Pixar pal around popcorn buckets coming out. The Paint the Night parade will be back in Disneyland soon as still part of the 70th anniversary of Disneyland. There's still a lot of the celebrations going on at the original park, which is cool to see. So another big thing that I've only just seen this week, well, when I was putting this news together, so this probably might have slipped a lot of people as well if you haven't seen it, is that we have buildings for the attractions and shows in Piston Peaks and the Villains Land, which looks really interesting. Massive building between Piston Peaks and the Villains Land, which I find interesting of what's going to go there. From what I've seen, two buildings for there's two buildings for cars, there's two buildings for Villains Land's attraction, because the majority of the cars ones are going to be outdoors. It tends to be cool. It makes me more interested in what they're doing, that it doesn't seem to be screen related, which is always a plus when it comes to rides. Villains Land, I cannot wait to see what is coming to it, and I've seen some bits that Haunted Mansion has started going through its refurb and the scrim up, so they're starting to work on the Villains Land section. A lot of the cars section seems to be moving much quicker in terms of construction, but there's been a lot of construction updates, so I'm going to leave that construction for Thursday, because on Thursday I'm going to do Melody Time to get back into the schedule, so you'll have Melody Time out on Thursday as well. So that is another bit of housekeeping I forgot to say. You've got 2 full episodes this week, so no bonus episode, just episode 12, I'm going to say, will be Melody Time now. So the films won't be in number order, because when I have guests on, they're going to be episodes as well as the films when we get to them. So that's why the number in order might feel out of shape, but that's just how I'm going to work it out. Another big thing this week on the Disney Plus side of things is the Muppet Show returns on February 4th, and hopefully this might see, if it does well, we could be seeing a full Muppet Show coming back to screens, which would be cool and interesting. And I know Emma of the Wandering Wilkinsons would adore that, having more Miss Piggy on her screen. So hopefully we will see what that brings, and I do think there's going to be a bit of Muppets revival this year, especially with your rock and roller coaster now being Muppets themed, which would be done by the summer, which is why I'm more inclined to say that Cars 4 and Monsters Inc. 3 are happening, because there seems to be a lot of park synergy with what's being released at the moment. So we'll see how that lines up with the whole films and shows. So this week's film is Fun and Fancy 3. Now, I don't know how I got it in my head that this film is called Fun and Fancy 3. I think I've seen a typo somewhere, but in my memory, this film's always been Fun and Fancy 3. So reading that it's actually Fun and Fancy 3 was like, interesting. That's not how I know it. So the film Fun and Fancy 3 was directed by Jack Kinney, who has, I believe, directed all of them since the beginning. You can quote me if I'm wrong, and that's on the animation. He directed Bill Roberts and Hamilton Lusk also directing on the animation, with William Morgan directing the live action. The film was produced by Walt Disney. The film was written by Homer Brightman, who has been a writer or involved since Snow White, Eldon Dedier, Lance Molly, Harry Reeves, Tom Crabb, Ted Sears, and Sinclair Lewis. And Sinclair Lewis worked on the original Bongo. The film stars Edgar Bergen as himself, Charlie McCarthy, and Martin Shrewd. Luana Patton plays herself. Cliff Edwards voices Jiminy Cricket, as he did in Pinocchio. Walt Disney voices Mickey Mouse. Clarence Nash voices Donald Duck, Black Cat, Birds, Cow, Bull, and Scarecrow. Rinto Kolvik voices Goofy, Jiminy Cricket, Barkin, and Bongo Bear. Billy Gilbert plays Willie the Giant. Anita Gordon voices the Golden Harp, and Dina Shaw voices is as the singer and narrator of Bongo, and Jimmy McDonald voices Mickey Mouse and Lumpjaw. Studios is Walt Disney Pictures. The film was released in November 1947. It has a running time of 73 minutes and was released in English as its primary language. Fun and Fancy 3 is the 1947 animated anthology film produced by Walt Disney Productions and released by RKO Pictures, and is one of the package films. The package films include Silly Disamigos, The Three Camberos, and Melody Time, all which we're currently going through, and was produced in the 1980s, and it is the 9th canon animated feature. The Mickey and the Beanstalk portion of the film was originally developed. So the Mickey and the Beanstalk segment was the last time that Walt Disney would provide the voice of Mickey Mouse himself. As one, he was too busy working on other productions, and two, he was a prolific smoker. Therefore, it was hurting his lungs, and therefore, Jimmy McDonald, who was a sound effects artist across the company, stepped in and became the voice of Mickey Mouse. Production history. So, during the 90s, Mickey and the Beanstalk and Bongo. During the 90s, Mickey and the Beanstalk and Bongo were originally developed as two separate films. So there is a universe where Mickey and the Beanstalk was its own feature and Bongo was its own feature, and that's interesting to think about, that potentially if there wasn't a world war, we would see a lot more features within these time frames. And yet I've mentioned the Second World War, as always, with these films. It's kind of a given when you're talking about the films that were released in the 1940s. But 1947, we are seeing the World War had ended in 1945. So there's not too much World War here with this one, Melody Time or Ichabod and Mr. Toad. So that'll be interesting to see what we're looking at when it comes to production. In the late 1930s, Mickey's popularity fell behind that of Donald Duck, Goofy, Pluto cartoons, Pluto and Fleischer's Popeye. So there was a decline in the want and need for Mickey Mouse, which I find interesting to think about, that this was how Disney intended to make sure that Mickey Mouse star was front and center again of his own company, and he wasn't being overshadowed by other people in the films, in the cartoons, such as the Brave Little Tailor and Sorcerer's Apprentice. She was a part of the feature film Fantasia. In early 1940, during the production of Fantasia, Bill Cotterill and T. He pitched the idea of a feature film based on the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, starring Mickey Mouse as Jack and Donald Duck and Goofy as supporting players. When pitched to Walt, he burst out laughing. So therefore, we can already see that he wasn't really invested in this film. If he was, the first thing he did was laugh, which is understandable because this is his character. Mickey, he created Mickey Mouse. So hearing ideas about making Mickey into other films from other ideas, you can understand to a point why he would laugh, and claimed that that they murdered his characters, which is a bit dramatic, if I'm going to be honest, because actually it's quite a genius marketing strategy to have characters that you already own, for one, and you already have the assets for in creating stories that exist, but using the characters you have, and then that gravitates people to go into the films. If it was Jack and the Beanstalk at this time, they probably might not have gone. But because you've got Mickey, and audience are aware and understand who Mickey is, it's going to sell more. So honestly, I don't see it a character assassination of Mickey Mouse by just making him Jack. Honestly, I don't understand it, and frankly, from a point of view, I don't agree with that statement. Cotterill and he were able to persuade Walt into giving the green light, and story developed. The Legend of Happy Valley commenced on May 2nd, 1940. So, when I was reading this, I was like, Happy Valley? So if you're audience, if you're not familiar, there's a TV show in the UK called Happy Valley on the BBC. So when I was reading this, I was like, Happy Valley? That can't be right. So that's interesting. If you're a TV fan and want to watch something with an incredible actress, go and watch Happy Valley, because Sarah Lancashire is an amazing actress. So the original treatment of the original story that would end up becoming the film. However, there were deleted scenes. For example, the scene where Mickey took the cow to market was cut, where he would meet Honest John and Gideon from Pinocchio. As con artists, you're already using people that you already have assets for, so understandably, and it also brings back other characters that you can use and market. Say, these characters were in Pinocchio. Go and watch Pinocchio to know who they are. So it's a bit of a genius marketing strategy, and Marvel do that all the time, which is an interesting thing to think about. And also a scene where Minnie would be Queen Minnie, and she would give him the beans. So there's parts of it that were cut. Shortly after the rough animations for Dumbo were completed in May 1941, The Legend of Happy Valley was put into production, using many of the same cast silhouettes, although Akio doubted if it would be able to be possible and be a success, since it was on a simple budget film in 6 months, 50 minutes, and being animated on Happy Valley. On October 27th, 1941, due to the Disney animator strike and World War II, which had cut off Disney's foreign market, as we've touched upon and discussed over the last few episodes, it's understandable why production was stalled on this film. Meanwhile, production would start on Bongo, a film based on the short story written by Sinclair Lewis for Cosmopolitan magazine in 1930. It was suggested that Bongo could be a prequel to Dumbo, and some of the cast from the 1941 film would appear as supporting characters. However, the idea was never fully materialised, and that's interesting to think about, that I've never thought about. We could have had a prequel to Dumbo. How would you have felt about a prequel to Dumbo, is a question for you. I wonder how you would have felt about that. So maybe I'll think about that, because we could have had a film called Bongo that was set in the same time period as Dumbo, and we've started to get prequels a lot now in mainstream media, so this could have been a really interesting and unique aspect that Disney hadn't gone down yet. And to be fair, Disney hasn't really delved into prequels too much. Pixar have, Monsters University, which I think was a genius idea. I just think some of it was not executed greatly, which is why it's not as good as the first film, but nothing will ever compete with the first Monsters Inc. But yeah, there's a really interesting thing to think about, is that we could have had this prequel, which I find interesting that they were discussing this, but I would love to know if there's any material sat around that they have lying about that they could use, or just show that this thing existed. So Bongo had a chimpanzee as a friend that was called Chimpy, that was ultimately dropped when considering the story. So this was always going through changes and dynamics in storytelling, which I find incredibly fascinating to think about and discuss, that we were looking at this really unique production history that this film has, that the others don't seem to have, which I find really unique and fascinating to this film. That this film is packaged of two films that were meant to be features. On that same day, and the army came into the studio and asked them to help out with the war effort, which would take over all production. Due to this, Bongo was ultimately put on hold, so it was put into production hell. So Bongo would, a term that is used throughout the industry is production hell, where a project that is currently going through constant changes and hasn't got off the ground. For example, Marvel Studios' Blade. It's an easy example to showcase it's a modern one that's gone through so much that it's now looking like it might not happen. We'll see what happens, but that's the best example I can give you for production hell. That's a really modern example. And alongside this, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Cinderella and the Wind and the Willows, Song of the South, and The Legend of Happy Valley, which is going to be interesting when I touch on Song of the South at some point. Please put in the comments thoughts on Song of the South. I'd be interested to see what you say about it and how you feel about Tiana's Bayou Adventure replacing Splash Mountain. Being interesting one to think about. And therefore they were creating the propaganda using what we've touched on upon in Three Campbellos and Salidas Vegas. So Walt felt that since the animation of Bongo and The Legend of Happy Valley, which had been renamed Mickey and the Beanstalk at this current time, so its working title, which I find fascinating, is The Legend of Happy Valley. I've never known that before. If you have, That's kind of niche and cool to know about. That's like a pub question. What was the original working title for Mickey and the Beanstalk? And thought that they weren't sophisticated enough to be standalone features. Disney Animation. The artists then decided that they would be more convenient as part of a package film, like the ones they had been producing. At the time, Walt wanted Mickey and the Beanstalk to be paired with Wind in the Willows, which was in production and would ultimately become Ichabod and the Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And I loved Wind in the Willows as a kid, so I have never seen Ichabod and Mr. Toad, which I'm looking forward to watching at some point when we get to it in the next few weeks. And interestingly, the two films would then become the fabulous characters, which to be fair doesn't have a real big ring to it. The fabulous characters. Ultimately, I don't know if that would have sold, but Fun and Fancy 3? What's better? Tell me in the comments. However, Mickey and the Beanstalk was cut from the fabulous characters and paired with Bongo instead. The fabulous characters eventually added the legend of Sleepy Hollow and recited the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Side note, I adore Sleepy Hollow. If you've not seen the live action Sleepy Hollow, which isn't Disney, if you want nightmares, go and have it, because obviously Sleepy Hollow is the Headless Horseman, which the fantasy nerd and dark fantasy, I love it all. It's a really good film. And the next thing that we're going to touch upon, we're getting closer to the film now, so there's not too much more production notes. There's the note about Jimmy McDonald replacing Walt as the voice of Mickey, which I mentioned at the start. Celebrities such as Edgar Bergen and Dina Shaw were cast to introduce segments in the film, and that would be in order to appeal to a much wider demographic and audience. Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio were also placed in the scene, which sings the I'm a happy-go-lucky fellow, which is also a smart move, because at that point, Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket were becoming synonymous with the Disney brand, and ultimately Jiminy Cricket is a major part of the Disney brand, being the voice of When You Wish Upon a Star. So it makes incredible sense for why you would bring Disney characters such as them into this to really establish your brand, and I do find that incredibly interesting and fascinating to think about, and ultimately it really paid off for this film. So the release of the film was released September 2019, 47, and it was released to mixed reviews, which isn't a surprise with these films, as we found. There is a lot of mixed reviews to them. Although it was not a runaway film, it still had box office success, and along with the Disney package films of the 1940s, it helped finance 1950 Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp. So the films that really cement Disney as Disney comes from these films. We had to walk before we could run with some of the heavy hitters that they had in development. The film features two segments, as mentioned, Bongo and Mickey and the Beanstalk. So Bongo is the story of a circus bear who was fed up with the mistreatment of the circus people, which you can ultimately see why this was being developed as a Dumbo prequel. We're already seeing the circus references. The same themes are being played with that were played with in Dumbo, mistreatment, animal. So there's real themes here that you can ultimately see. If this had been a Dumbo prequel, it would have really slotted in nicely into that world that was created. Bongo runs away from the circus to the wild and the adventures that follow. This was based on the original story by Sinclair Lewis, which I've never read, so I might go and find this, and I'll probably throw a link on Instagram if that's something you'd like to see. So there's not really too much to talk about when it comes to Bongo. That's it for the story. It's a really beautifully crafted film, developed wonderfully, and I think personally it could have really worked as a Disney feature. And to be honest, it could really work as a Disney feature now. As much as it was created then, I do feel like Bongo's story really resonates with themes and ideologies that we're still discussing today. And ultimately, I do think it's got legs for a feature now than it probably did then. Probably CGI in the style of Frozen, Tangled, that style could work. Or to be fair, even 2D animation would be a wonderful seeing this film in that, because I do think it has legs, and I think it's finding the right writer who could be able to really craft out a narrative story that feels unique and refreshing but also pays homage to this tale. So That's an interesting thing to think about, and I think, honestly, it could work as a feature if you had the right writer, and it was created in the time. Mickey and the Beanstalk, so the major part of this package film, because there's only 2 compared to the last few who've had about 10, 12. So Mickey and the Beanstalk is a moralized adaptation of Jack and the Beanstalk, with Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy as peasants who discover temperamental temperament the There's going to be so much editing with this video. The temperamental Willy the Giant castle in the sky through the use of some magic beans. Jiminy Cricket appears, exploring a large house and singing I'm a happy-go-lucky fellow, originally written for Pinocchio, which you can totally tell from this film that song was written for that film. And honestly, I think it still could have fit, and personally might have helped heighten that story. Because you know my feelings on Pinocchio. I think it's a mess of a film, in that there's far too many villains, far too many different stories that don't correlate. But I think that song could have helped tighten things. That's just my personal take on that. Until he happens upon the record player and some records, and sets it up to play the story of Bongo as told by Dina Shaw. However, in the re-release of Bongo, Jiminy Cricket narrates the story himself. In the second featurette, the story of Mickey and the Beanstalk is narrated by Edgar Borgen in live-action sequences, who, with the help of the then ventriloquist puppets Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Sneed, he tells the tale of the child actress Lorna Potton at her birthday party. The story origins as in a prosperous land called Happy Valley, which is a lush green valley complete with fertile farmland. So the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk, if you understand this tale, Jack's poor. He's told by his mother to go and sell the cow, and instead of getting money, he takes beans, plants the beans, massive beanstalk sprouts out the ground. He climbs up the beanstalk, finds giant castle even, and inside it are treasures beyond belief. There's 2 iterations that can go down. There's the golden harp or the golden goose, and Jack takes a lot of the treasures out of the giant's castle. The giant finds out. He's furious. He chases Jack down the beanstalk. The villagers and people, they cut down the beanstalk just as Jack escapes, and there we have the giant dead. So we'll see how Gruesome Wasteland. Mickey, Donald, and Goofy are suffering greatly due to starvation, as only a small loaf of bread and a single bean to share amongst themselves. As Mickey cuts their daily bread and rations, serving to the long-suffering Donald, temporarily loses his composure and begins to savagely eat anything in his reach. Mickey decides to sell the cow. Yeah, it plays the same, and he gets some beans. The next morning, the trio sights a great castle in a land above the clouds, where everything is abnormally large compared to themselves. Yeah, that's another thing I forgot, that they're incredibly large. They climb up the beanstalk. They try and find things to sell. However, Mickey is able to slip away before Willy locks the other 2 up. Donald and Goofy get locked up. The harp then lulls Willy to sleep with her magic voice as Mickey attempts to retrieve the key and rescue his friends. He's nearly discovered when he accidentally opens a box of snuff inside the giant's pocket, causing him to sneeze. I see. Just sneezing powder. The trio then conspire to escape back to Happy Valley with the harp, using the beanstalk. As Donald and Goofy transport the harp, Mickey attempts to tie Willy's shoestrings together, and as an insurance policy, just in case Willy wakes up and attempts to catch them. Thus begins a wild chase, and Willy is in hot pursuit of Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. As they take the harp back down the beanstalk at the bottom, the trio set to fall in the beanstalk with a large saw. Yeah, it plays the same. At the end of the story, Edgar Bergen comforts sobbing Mortimer Shroud, who was mourning for Willy. Just as Bergen says that Willy is a fictional character and not real, Willy himself appears alive and well, tearing the roof of Bergen's house. Willy inquires about Mickey's whereabouts, but Bergen faints out of shock, while Mortimer tells Willy good night. The scene closes with Willy searching for Mickey in Hollywood while placing the Brown Derby restaurant on his head as a hat. And that's the end of Fun and Fancy 3. which is an interesting title. I think a different title probably would have worked better. I don't know what title would have worked better for this film, personally. So maybe leave that in the comments if you have any ideas of what we could have called this film. And to be honest, right now, we probably could have seen both these films as separate entities if they were made today, which I find incredibly interesting to think about. The legacy. What's its legacy? There's not too much of a legacy as we found with these films, within parks, within media, just because there's not too much to dive into, which is a bit sad and interesting. I guess Jack and the Beanstalk, if we're taking this out, I can think about Jack and the Beanstalk, because Jack and the Beanstalk has been told many times across a lot of old media. So there's Jack and the Giant Slayer, which is another iteration. Jack and the Beanstalk was loosely adapted in Once Upon a Time season 2, with them flipping that Jack was a woman, which is kind of cool. That they flipped that and made it a bit different, and she was Jacqueline, and they were trying to steal the magic beans that you were used as portals. And Anton, played by Jorge Garcia from Lost, was a big part of season 2, and Anton was protecting his home. And the really Little Mermaid, the giant of the beanstalk. So it's an interesting tale and iteration thing. So there's that. The only other thing I could find is that in Sir Mickey's store in Walt Disney World and Disneyland Paris, you can find decorations from Mickey and the Beanstalk. You can find the giant Willy. So interestingly, there's some interesting trivia. So interestingly, the scene where Edgar Bergen is comforting Mortimer Sherd appears in 2007's Enchanted, which I cannot wait to sit and discuss on the podcast. We have originally Gideon and Jay Weatherton appearing, as I mentioned earlier on. However, the scene was cut. A lot of the scenes were cut. Donald was originally going to have an encounter with Willy's cat, portrayed by an enormous version of Figaro from Pinocchio, but ultimately was cut, probably due to the fact that they didn't have the budget or time to reanimate Figaro large. Disney did originally plan to adapt Jack and the Beanstalk as a film in 2018 called Gigantic that never got off the production floor and was ultimately scrapped. So that's going to be an interesting one to have a dive down into, and maybe have an episode dedicated to films that never made it to screen. For example, the Pixar film, I can't think what it's called. Pixar film. Newt was going to come out, but then Rio was released at Blue Sky, which had a similar premise to Newt, so they never did Newt, and ultimately Rio's now owned by Disney. So that's a bit funny to tell. It'll be interesting to talk about. But yeah, it was meant to come out, and if you watch, you'll notice in Zootopia, the first one, in the Duke Weaselton scene, where he has the hilarious bootleg versions of Disney films as animal versions, you'll notice there is a reference to Gigantic, because they were in the films that are shown were in the order of films that were getting made and released, which I find incredibly hilarious and really funny poke meta joke from Disney themselves with that film. I hope it's in the second one, because I have not yet to see it just because I haven't had time. There's not too much else to discuss about when it comes to Fun and Fancy Tree, so this is probably where I'm going to end this week's episode, which is going to be a really fun one to edit. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Shout outs this week go to the lovely The Foolish Mortals on Instagram and YouTube, who are lovely people who do Disney vlogs. They've just been doing a Hong Kong Disneyland vlog series on YouTube. So go ahead and check that out. And they're incredibly lovely people and are always around on Disney Hot Topic, which I forgot to mention last week. So I was on Disney Hot Topic last week chatting all things live actions, which was a really fun episode. So go and watch that one. And then I hopped on to be a guest judge on this week's upcoming Battle of the Disney Parks. So stay tuned for that, coming out on Friday at 7. Episodes are always Friday at 7 on Disney Hot Topic, so go and subscribe because they're a fun laugh to do, and if you want to see many Disney adults chatting, that's the place to go. And ultimately, you may start seeing some of those people on this channel too as guests on the podcast, because I'm hoping to get people on to do films as well at some point, as well as doing what we did with Tom. I also want to just quickly say that the lovely Tom Taylor, who was my first guest, has just started a YouTube channel, so please go and give that a subscribe, because he's done an amazing first episode, and really go and give his channel some love. And we have finally, it's Rob and Matt, two vloggers that I've just recently found, and they're awesome in doing vlogs in a very cinematic and unique way of doing vlogs that I find so cool and interesting, and it just brings some new life into how to make Disney vlogs feel unique and different that I found so interesting to watch. So go and give them a follow and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram. Everything that I've just mentioned right now, will be linked below in the show notes on YouTube and Spotify. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at straightontildisneypod. You can email me all your thoughts at straightontildisneypod@gmail.com. Don't be afraid to leave comments discussing your thoughts below. And thank you for listening, and bye.